Because we give the sky its color, literally we award the sky its color, I can make changes to your context of vision that then color the sky. Basically, the light I'm using is not the light you're looking at. You're looking at the result of this into the sky. In terms of this encounter with color, which is basically what this really is, you come to see colors that you haven't seen before because the colors really are not there. We think we receive everything, that everything comes to us, but in fact, we're very much a part of the perception that we create.
So we just I put together a few images of other works by James Turrell. Some of you may know a lot of them, but perhaps not. And I thought we would talk a little about where this work comes from. This work is so different in so many ways than other works I've seen so many works, but this work here in the garden is at a completely different level in terms of painterly color. I think the extravagance of the architecture, which seems to bear some relationship to even not just the stupa pieces, but spaceships and follies and all kinds of architectural images. And for those of you who have not been to many sky spaces, this one was perhaps the most dramatic performance I have ever seen. Usually there, and in the earliest, there's a very slow and meditative movement towards this black blue, the deep black blue. But here you gave us a spectacular performance of color, and then right at the end, we saw blues right to black. It was theatrical.
Another flower in the garden.
Another flower in the garden. So maybe theatrical is a word. When you started your work in the 60s, and what was going on in New York at that time was there was a word, I don't like the word, but minimalism, things being made simpler in art. And there was a lot of criticism of your work because your work didn't have a tangible object. It was, I think it was described sometimes as theatrical.
Yes, well, New York is sort of always thought to be a city of culture, and Los Angeles was thought to be a city of entertainment. So definitely we were involved in more of the theater of the complete piece. That is, we would detail the whole space out more,
right.
So that the context was clearly set. And so people called that, I remember Clement Greenberg saying that this, well, he said it to me as a way of not a compliment, to say that the work was theatrical. And I said, and the criticism is?
Right. What's wrong with that?
That's right. Anyway, that was, and the other thing, this was a time when a lot of the artists in New York were dealing with black, gray, lead, and colors of that sort. And so to take on a richness of color was thought to be, almost frivolous.
Well, and this piece is so colorful, I guess it does. I was thinking it did maybe have something to do with being in this garden and being in Mexico, where there is so much color.
Well, I think that emotion is more fully dealt with in Latin culture than it is in Germany, England, America.
Right.
That's very, very different kind of dealing with emotion. And that was one of the strangest things is for a long time, people would write reviews, and it had mostly to do with the technique rather than what it was coming out. And I felt that had to do with more the kind of emotion you get from music than normally from art. And that this emotion actually came more from how light was dealt with. You know, Skurryabin, the composer, Russian composer, wrote all his music to go together with a presentation of light. And his wife played the color organ, which I went to see in Moscow at his home. It was quite crude, but it was very effective, and there it was. And he used the scales of relationships between musical notes and colors that Ouspensky and Gurdjieff used. And that came from this man called Remington, who studied sensory synesthesia. And that's what I also studied at school.
So sensory synesthesia, maybe it's worth saying something about that, because this idea that you cross senses, that a color might connect to a smell or some other sense, right, is the simple definition. We have a work at LACMA right now, which is a room which fills with color like this, and I have been with people who feel radical temperature changes. I haven't had so much smell, but even hunger and a sense of other senses that they feel, and of course, also changes in emotion. I don't know how many people here felt a kind of almost musical change in emotion in this piece. Mm-hmm. But that comes from, early 20th century modernists were interested. Kandinsky talked a lot about how music and color come together. And Thomas Wilfred is an American artist who was from New York at the turn of the century, born a little before the century, and had color organs and made works that changed color. But in some ways, you've waited till it's been the last third of your career, of your work, that you've been able to do these more time-based, almost musical performances in light.
Well, several things there is that we finally have a technology where we can actually change color.
Right.
If you're a painter, you can go to the local art store and get hundreds of colors mixed already for you. There was a time when you almost had to be an alchemist and make your own paint. And so that's how I started. I had to actually make my own color and mix it. And I did that usually with neon light and big Celsons and things like this to be able to change the color. The problem with neon light is it never goes off. You have to have about 8% light on, because it will then just pop off. And when you start it on, it sort of bursts on. You can't get a very tiny amount. Mm-hmm. In the morning program, you'll find it much more sensitively dealt with. And so it's quite different. It's good to actually understand, if you go see the morning program and then see the night program, you can see the difference in what the piece is, morning to night. That's somewhat valuable. But I was always interested in the big thing was this change from night to day and the change from day to night. Because we were not made for the light of the noonday sun. Our pupils are absolutely closed. We squint and even wear dark glasses. And it's not until the light is reduced and the pupil opens that feeling comes out of the eyes like touch. And then you really can feel and experience light as this sort of magic elixir that it is. We have this relationship to light. We drink it through the skin as vitamin D. In other words, ultraviolet through skin makes vitamin D. So light is a food, part of our diet. Without it, there are some big health issues, particularly with the relationship to serotonin and depression. And then, of course, we have this very emotional response to color and to light. Plus, there's a spiritual quality, too, and a lot of people will feel that just in a piece like this. But if you think about Saul on the road to Damascus, where he had this epiphany, think about Ezekiel and the first chapter of Ezekiel. Think about Samadhi, the Buddha, and enlightenment and the light-filled void. And even with near-death experience, all of these things with light are described using a vocabulary of light. So light is, we have this big relationship to light, but it's not till recently that we actually looked at light. Generally, we use light to illuminate other things. I just happen to like the thingness or the substance of light itself.
Which is perfect to talk about this first work in light, Aphram, from 1966. And this was one of the first works in the big retrospective exhibition we made in Los Angeles, and one of the first works you made in this way, with light.
Yes.
That is in a gallery. It hangs there. Touch seems to be very much what this is also about. You can't tell in this slide, but when that light hangs there, it is as if it can be touched, that it has a three-dimensional quality, which I guess was the primary point for you at this moment.
That's where we started. Yeah, I started.
That idea of the touch.
Yeah. And then sometimes in the aperture pieces that have this opening, it fills up the space right to this opening, and you feel as though it's a surface to touch.
So then, and that was done in a corner, as you saw, and there's a fantastic quality of how the light gathers in the corner and creates this physical object. But these are pieces that were made kind of across a corner, and this is where you first had that experiment where you could feel the light as a skin, right, as a surface.
Surface, yeah.
And the key to that was this sharp edge, correct? Like the part of it is the...
As it is here with the piece here. In other words,
Right.
I'd like to bring the feeling of the space of sky coming right down to the top of the space that you're in, almost as though it glasses over as a substance.
This, when you come upon these works, people think that they are a piece of glass or something that's put there like a sky space. So, question, I looked at this and I thought, oh, you must have seen this at one point, and it almost looks in perspective like with those first sky spaces, and you know, it was just about putting it up above and using the natural light. Was that the sequence, or did
It was. Basically, I started out thinking of, Book 7 in the Republic, Plato's Cave, where he talks about light coming into the cave, imaging this, quote, real world upside down backwards on the cave wall. And what I literally did was take the space on the inside of a building and make it all perfectly white, and then I would put light onto it. The strange thing is that when you put a shape of light onto the wall, it would not reside on the same plane as the wall. I thought, wow, that's fantastic. This is a very plastic or malleable medium, and very painterly. So I had sort of, these things kind of worked with a picture plane. Mm-hmm. So my work really came more out of a painter's space in 3 dimensions than it did that of a sculptor or architect. But that all came later because I soon found I had, our light was just not very significant in relationship to the light of the sun. So I had to make these spaces that protected and apprehended light for our perception. Sometimes people have asked me when they buy a work, what do they own? And I say, well, you own the light that's passing through. Excuse me here. And that was maybe not the thing to say to a collector, but it was, in fact, the case. But, we do this with sound. We're able to sell sound or whatever, music and all that. So I thought the object was a little bit of an impediment.
Right.
But there's still, with all these, there is thingness. You feel this thing, and that presence of light. And so the big thing there was not having light illuminate other things, but getting the thingness of light to be felt.
And before you did the AFRAM, of course, you were working in your studio in Santa Monica and making apertures, openings in the windows or cracks where light would come in, and you experimented.
That was more like Plato's Cave, where I actually took light from outside and imaged it on the wall surfaces.
So that you had that Plato's Cave.
And across the floor and ceiling. Yeah.
Which you see clearly going to AFRAM. Then this seems to be a big step. And is it that you think, well, then you're going to go back to that being a big aperture and you will use nature and natural light? And is that how did you get from here to the PS1? This is the first, the first sky spaces.
Took the wall or the picture plane and then cut a hole in it, through it. But then also a kind of opening so that you didn't see the thickness of the opening. So it was very perfectly trying to make something that could be on the same plane.
This works the same way as the piece outside, where this knife edge or very sharp edge, it functions to glue. I feel like it glues the sky right to the top. You can't see it as well in this one. Here is and this is the piece at Ponza's. I just for fun, put after this one, Joseph Albers. Do all of you know Albers' paintings? And you must have studied these phenomena very...
Like Barragan, he liked Albers quite a bit too. This idea that the context, color is very malleable, and it's the context of vision that allows you to change the color of the sky. Obviously I'm not changing the color of the sky, but I'm changing your perception of it by changing your context of vision. We're not that well aware of the fact that we award the sky its color and how much we're a part of that which we perceive. So my interest always is to give it sort of a gentle little nudge, a reminder of the fact that we are very much a part of that which we behold. All that in front of us, we do create. And I think it's important that we realize how much of this reality that we live within, we are responsible for making.
Well, and that's what comes out when you read Albers and you think about that, you realize how seeing is a half and half proposition. It's what's there and what I put into it. And that does revolutionize the way you think about art.
Well, when you see Ed Reinhardt and you see him bringing color out of blackness, out of darkness, it's just, that's amazing, and that's truly a very strict approach to the sublime that he used. Rothko was a little more slapdash. He sometimes really hit it and sometimes didn't. But the two of them really did do it with bringing light out of paint. Making paint almost truly like light.
So I guess, Rothko would be the sunset program and Reinhardt would be the sunrise program, right?
Yes, that's true.
It works that way.
And then you throw in a little bit of Turner, and don't forget Constable and his paintings of clouds.
Exactly, the paintings of clouds. Everyone saw that in the sky there.
And he started with a horizon, and then he eliminated the horizon. And I'm interested in the new landscape without horizon.
Which is what you create in these works, right? This is at LACMA in Los Angeles, and this was one of the last works in the exhibition, but is still there. And it is a space where you can feel that picture plane, same way as the blue piece, the diamond piece, and it feels like it's a solid, but in this case you can walk up steps and then walk through it into another space.
I had some earlier spaces without the stairs, and twice people dove into the piece thinking it was soft. So I thought, well, now I'll just put some stairs up there and assist you in.
Very Mayan pyramid-like, those stairs too, right?
Well, I like that. I do like the pyramidal form.
What happens when you go inside this piece? I don't know why we're. Oh,
there we go.
Okay, so we get inside. I don't know if there's one before. When you get inside the piece, you were in this space filled with color. You were in color, and again, this piece changes. And I think very much about, we looked at Albers, and Albers was able to put two colors next to each other and create a difference in how you see color. And he could demonstrate that by putting two different frames around the same color, and the middle color would be different. But what you've achieved in these works is also to have color in time, like the work here at the garden, so that what happens is that you're making color in time somehow, because when I don't know if you were anybody was in the beginning of the piece when it's very purple, and then if you step outside, the world looks entirely green, right? It is green because of the plants, but it looks even more green when you've been in purple. And this is this idea of relativity of color, but it's also true that we have relativity of color in time.
It doesn't last. We only hold a color about 8 seconds.
Right.
And so you step into this, and then it seems as though someone's changing the color, when that's only that fading is coming from the saturation of the cones in your retina. And so it's just seeming to disappear.
But you are mixing color in time,
Yes.
because as this piece changes, your eyes mix this color. That's not quite the color there. It's a combination of the color that you retain and the color that you receive, which is a fantastic thing to think about, mixing color in time and not just on a surface. It takes painting another step for sure. But it is worth saying also, these works, as you were saying, are without horizon, that all of our history of painting and our experience of our lives, because we are land-based beings, we always have a horizon. And yet these works have no horizon.
But this new world that we're stepping into in space, there's no horizon. In flying, when you have the flight into instrument conditions when it's cloudy, skiing with whiteout, even whiteout on roads when you have snowstorms and you get this whiteout condition. Also underwater, where you get this sort of rapture of the deep. Often people don't know which way is up, because if you have a neutral density belt, the only way you can know which way is up is to see which way your bubbles go. So that there are these places we've stepped into this new landscape, a new horizonless landscape, and that's certainly true in cyberspace. No up, no down, no left or right. In fact, that's how you can look at all the images of my work. It doesn't much matter if you have it right side up or upside down.
Sometimes we put a person there just so you would know, otherwise you wouldn't.
I don't
I
care,
know you don't like
care for the person pictured in these slides, but people seem to always do that. Because there wouldn't be much that you'd see. Although I have to say, down in Australia, they had 3 days of nude visits to the show, and the thing was amazing is it would be so sort of bleached out. All you could see was people's hair and their eyebrows, and that was quite amazing. Which is, I mean, you think that you would be exposed in this light, but in fact, that's all erased.
Clothed in light.
That's right. The true raiment of light.
That's right. Clothed in light. I just want to for a second flip back, and then we'll go to Rodin Crater. That this is again the '60s. This is in Los Angeles again at LACMA on the left with Robert Irwin, another important artist who was working in LA at the time, and the two of you collaborating with. Ed Wirtz, who was right there, a scientist who worked for the Garrett Corporation and for NASA, the Aerospace Administration, thinking about the habitability of space, right?
Yes, we were working on the space lab.
The space lab. And that led to works and a lot of experimentation, but things that you couldn't realize until now. And I just want to say that it's very exciting to me to see an artist like you who is worked for a few years, but your works now seem to be
50 years.
50 years. Okay, 50 years. I wasn't going to say how many years. But not only are you pursuing ideas that you had in 1967 in ways that in 68, 69 that you couldn't achieve the results then because of technology and other things, but that these last years you've had more new breakthroughs, I think, perhaps because of the technology, but also because of all that time of seeing color.
Well, I remember Sam Francis, who was an artist who very wonderfully helped support younger artists. I was one of them. And I asked him one time why he would keep returning to themes that he had been involved with for most of his life. And he said, well, you know, he thought that artists like to beat around the bush, and they just beat around the bush till they damn well beat it out of the bush. That was his expression about keeping at it.
Keeping at it, right. Yeah. Which you've done, and in many, many ways. There are themes in your work that are consistent. This is a perceptual cell that you lie down, go inside, and there is definitely no up, no down, no sense of distance or space. You think it would be small, but actually the space inside here becomes infinite at moments, and you also are able to see literally from behind your eye is that behind the eye seeing. Yeah. All of these different ways of dealing with, and color becomes key to this too, as you experience this. This will be in Los Angeles again in a few months, so you'll be able to come back and see this piece. But I just wanted to talk for a few minutes about your big project that has taken nearly 50 years.
Well, Michael does sell himself as a director of a museum, but I know him as a pilot who I witnessed it, would fly underneath the wires instead of going over them. So this is how I knew Michael very early on, so as a pilot.
We would fly together, that's true, and you took me flying over the same landscape in Arizona where you found, after a systematic survey from your airplane of the United States, you found Roden Crater. And if this picture were in color, you would see you had red hair, right, when Roden Crater started. So I just want to, this is just a measure of how long the project has taken.
Yes, it actually, we're realizing it took 12 years to do this project. And 12 years when I first met Mireya about it and came down here. And you know, Roden Crater is taking some time too. I have to say that I'm probably like, you may know some friends that still have to finish their doctoral thesis and are still working on it. Well, I'm one of those.
Here you are with your airplane that you were flying, the same type of airplane at that time.
If you go back, you can see the distinct shape of the helio. Well, yes, there. It is made for short takeoff and landing, often very short.
And there it is
and
in the
there
background.
It is there, yeah.
In the company color,
yes,
which is blue, if you hadn't noticed. So I just wanted to show this, just to connect flying to Roden Crater. There are so many beautiful descriptions of a kind of consciousness which is changed through flying, through being in the air, through being in a different perspective, seeing in 360 degrees, which is rare to see the horizon in 360 degrees. And perhaps someone who wrote most beautifully about that was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the great French pilot and author who wrote about flying, and you probably know him as the author of The Little Prince. And this is the James Turrell Little Prince part of the talk, where I love this illustration from The Little Prince, because the Little Prince has to clean out his volcano on his small planet, and it seems like you've been doing this for some time, taking care of your volcano in Arizona. But my favorite part of The Little Prince is when he talks about his planet being so small. And the planet shrinking is an obvious metaphor for aviation and flight, which shrinks
the world.
Space, right? The world shrinks. And he says, my planet is so small, I can watch the sunset, and then I can move my chair and watch it again. And in some ways, I think a lot of your work is about that somehow, of watching this, being able to watch the sunset as many times
Well, I thought about
as you want.
having pieces so that, sky spaces, so that it was always coming into the sweet spot of the twilight. And so if there are 24 time zones, you'd have 24, so that means it would always be coming, because it takes about an hour that you have for twilight, as you saw tonight. So 24 would actually, if they're on the equator, would be all you'd need, but actually you only need 12, because when it's coming into one at night, it's also coming into one in the morning. But then, of course, if you change your latitude and go up higher, the twilight lasts longer in the summer, and so you don't really need that many. But I wanted to make these, I thought a certain number would be good, and I was very taken by Prince Ashoka, who thought he would make 1,000 stupas for the Buddha. So that, well, but he was a prince, so maybe I don't need to make quite as many. So
you could make 1,000 sky
Yes.
spaces. You have a little time.
Well, yes, I mean, I have made 75 that are public. So that seems like quite a few. They're all unique, as you saw tonight. They're each
Each
different
one is
in the
completely
light
different.
program, different in the form and all of that. But there was this artist, Quaker artist. My family's Quaker, so I was interested in the Peaceable Kingdom. This is a painting that was made by Edward Hicks. And he always would have the lion and the lamb. This shows you how naive the Quakers are about war and the use of force, is that the lion would always lie down with the lamb. And these paintings depicted in one, the Indians signing the only treaty that was kept by America with William Penn. He was signing the treaty with the Indians. And then it turns out he's made over 100 of these paintings, all with different themes, but they always had the lion and the lamb, and they were always titled The Peaceable Kingdom. So I thought, well, I'll make 100, and that ought to do. And but these sort of illusions that you have in fantasies are no different than anyone else. I mean, making a pyramid in the Yucatan, or making one out of a volcano in Arizona, it would be a lot easier if I were a pharaoh, but I don't remember having been one, even though Shirley MacLaine does.
Exactly.
But here, it's not that hard to make a pyramid out of this, because the pyramid is already made. I just have to put the tunnels in.
Right.
Yes.
Here it is, the Pyramid of Rodin Crater. So I just wanted to say, this project, this modern art that you make, but yet it does have so many relationships to other landforms, architecture made of earth, in this case,
Yes.
Maze Howe,
And mound builders. Yeah.
mound builders. This is Rodin Crater, again, the mound in this desert landscape. It is like a pyramid where it exists in this flat desert, and its pyramidal form held up above the sky. But also, there are so many, not just pyramids in Mexico, but this is Borobudur,
Yes.
the many stupas all in one. Does Rodin Crater, I feel like you found a lot of these references later and attached them to Rodin Crater. It's not as if Rodin Crater is a copy of these ancient monuments, but I always feel like you keep finding things in the past that connect to these intuitions you had about light and the desert.
Well, this is the same kind of revisionist history that everyone makes up in their own personal life. And so I just did it in art. And so I was very interested in also the revisionist history of looking at how this kind of installation work was done earlier in the 19th century, the great exhibitions and shows that they would have of dioramas, panoramas, and camera obscuras. And in fact, one of the famous artists everyone knows, of course, is that did a diorama was Daguerre. Now, Daguerre was a painter. He just wanted to be able to fix this image he saw in the camera obscura. And so he did and invented the daguerreotype. But prior to that, he made these amazing dioramas. And you'd come up, there was a platform, and you'd come up stairs from underneath, then a large, usually circular shape. And he had this one in the Paris exhibition where when the lights were on the inside, you saw this daytime scene of in the Swiss Alps with the mountains and all that. And then the light would go down on the inside and come up on the outside, and you'd see the clouds were darkened by being thicker paint, and then there would be little lights down in the chalets. And so you had an installation painting. Even Stations of the Cross by Barnett Newman was really an installation painting, because you would go from one to the next, although it would have an order, but you could reverse the order, but there were all these ones that were next to each other, so you actually had to take them in some kind of order that he had made for you. So this idea of installation painting was very interesting, and also related a lot to, that was a very populist form that happened at these great exhibitions. And so I've kind of looked at that kind of almost as a populist art, I guess. An art that you didn't have to know every movement in art that had come before in order to understand what you're looking at. So that you could just come to it and have direct experience, and that was enough. So that's another part of my revisionist history that I talk about too.
It seems to me Roden Crater encompasses all these histories and, again, time. I mean, here you have, this is a drawing, etching, photo etching, where you're looking above, and here you see the tunnels and chambers that are cut into the pyramid, and light can pass through these tunnels. This is very tall. This is as tall as a skyscraper, and this is almost, it's about 3/4 of a mile, almost a kilometer, right? Not quite, at half.
No, that's two miles.
2 miles from this edge all the way to here. Yeah. Just to give you a sense of scale. But one of the things I love about Roden Crater is it seems to be an eye when you look down on it, looking out at the stars and the universe.
It's very much that, because if you look at, say, the Roman sculptures and some Greek sculpture, the eye was cut back in. You saw the eye, and then the pupil was cut back in. Sometimes they would put something in it, like a spot or something on it, but it actually had this carving out.
So this eye, this thing that sits on the earth, is an eye. It's a camera. Yeah. It witnesses the universe. It brings light inside it, not unlike our real eye. This is just an example. This is one of the spaces in section. This is an architectural drawing, so you've sliced across it, so you'd walk up these stairs and look inside this sphere. But there is another space above with a sky space, an opening, and this is a bath. So you can lie down in the bath.
So I use the water as one of the elements of the lens.
Right, and that water of the bath serves as a lens to project the stars down on sand.
White sand.
Here, which is again an eye.
Yeah.
And so there's this human metaphor, there's a cosmic metaphor. This is Boulet's, the great French architect's never-built cenotaph for Newton, Isaac Newton, which was day for night. This was, you would walk in and there would be holes poked in it so that you could see the night sky during the day, and then at night it would be illuminated as a sun to show this sort of power over the universe that an artist, an architect, a thinker, a scientist could have. And I just, since you can't be at Roden Crater right now, it's just worth saying this, the thing you started with, the malleability, that you can take light and you can move it like clay. that Rodin crater, which is that bowl, has this quality where it can change the shape of the sky, not just the color. But when you're in it, the sky, when you're in this bowl of Rodin crater, the sky changes its shape. And
it's hard to explain that.
It's hard to explain that, and this is just a page from a book that describes some of those things. But I guess I want to ask this idea of like the nature. There's a history of humans wanting to dominate nature, or understand it, dominate it, and we've tried also through philosophy and art to come to peace with it. And I'm interested whether you think about a philosophy of nature. Here you are in a garden. You've changed the shape of the sky. You've changed its color. You've sort of played with it. Do you have a philosophy of this sort of man and nature, human and nature?
One of the things people hear me say is that they talk about natural light and artificial light. I just have to say there is no such thing as artificial light. You have to burn something for it to release the energy that we see as light. And the light that's given off is characteristic of the material you're burning and the temperature at which it's burned. So there's truth in light in a number of ways. And I remember doing these little magnetron pieces that look like televisions, except I take a television, aim it the wrong way, and so you get the average light. And the thing that's really interesting is that you can see that. It doesn't have any image, it's just the average light, and you can look at a program that is a comic, a children's cartoon, a sporting event, the newscast with the blue screen, and you can look at a porn movie. And I can have all these there, and within 5 minutes you can identify correctly what you're looking at without seeing any image. So, of course, we can know a star without touching it by looking at its light. You can tell what the star is made of, that is the material that's being burned, and you can tell the temperature at which it's being burned, and you can tell how fast the star is receding away from us by how it shifted in Doppler effect toward the red end of the spectrum. So there's really this great knowing just from how things are revealed in light. And I said before, this is this wonderful elixir that connects the dream world. Remember, we have full vision with the eyes closed. Sometimes greater lucidity of color in the dream, sometimes greater clarity than we do with the eyes open. So here's this thing that connects the dream world with the so-called real world, the conscious awake state, and also this thing that we eat as the food, that we have an emotional response to, and then the reason that I present it in this way without using image is that when you look and stare into a fire, you often sort of drift off. There's this wonderful thing that you get staring at a fire. In fact, they even now at Christmas time have a program that just is a fire burning on television. And you just people turn this on in their houses around Christmas. It's bizarre, but instead of making a fire in their fireplace. But this idea that light can kind of take us places. It can actually engender a theta state, which is not quite the alpha state, which is a meditative state, but it is a state where we're thinking, but thinking without words. And so they're sort of drifting off, and you probably have done this. You just stared at something, you drift off. This is where light can connect you to these other realms, to this other part of your own consciousness. So light has this great power, and one of the things is if you put image into it, like in a movie is light. And I have to say I was really excited when I was young by Fantasia. I thought this was really going to be something, we're really headed somewhere. But the fact is that we just get involved in the story. The movie contains the story, so we get involved in the literature. But if you remove the image, you can actually feel the effect of light and what light can do. And the thing that's very interesting is there are now new experiments, and Arthur Zaonce is one of those that was part of this, where light knows when we're looking at it. That is, light has the behavior through a diffraction pattern when we're looking at it that's different than when we're not looking at it. This almost, if you want to anthropomorphize, it almost imbues light with consciousness. So that's a very powerful elixir and substance that we're talking about. And treating it that way, I think, is interesting and something that I have enjoyed doing. But
it does blur.
So this idea of nature, artificial, and us, one of our greatest conceits is to ever feel that we're apart from nature, that we're not nature itself, that what we do, I mean, the first constructions ever seen on this planet were made by a being. It's not the Great Wall of China, it's the Great Barrier Reef. Those were the first things made by an organism that could be seen from outer space. And we go about making our cities with about the same logic and planning as the coral that makes the barrier reef. I mean, we change laws and we pay off this and that, and we can get variances, and we can, all this planning that we once had to make cities is completely changed. So we have about the same kind of quality as, and the same level of intelligence as the coral that makes the barrier reef.
So then to end, I want to ask you one last question. I think we don't, there's the great sky space of Roden Crater in the center, the tunnel, the image stone, which is at the base, this image stone, which is at the base of this tunnel, which is the world's longest refractor telescope. And now this is walking up the tunnel of Roden Crater in time. You walk toward this shape, and as you walk toward that circle, it becomes an ellipse. You felt it as a circle, and now it's an ellipse. You can actually travel these stairs into the heavens, like break through the plane and into the heavens, or look back on Earth and see the sky and this stone. I think just in the interest of...
We'll show the...
This is one of the... Roden Crater is still being made. It's taking longer than the botanical garden piece. So this is the next space, well, one of the spaces that you're working on right now, the south space, which again relates to something ancient or older.
And the great reference here to the astronomer Prince Jai Singh, who corresponded with Tycho Brahe.
And so this space is also spherical space.
An instrument.
And it will...
That's the analemma. Analemma is the equation of time.
You can't see it all here, but there's a shape that will be traced by the sun over the course
at noon,
of the year at noon, and will follow this. So the shape of time will be physical inside Roden Crater. And here you will sit and look through this pointing device.
And there's a little washer in the center, yes.
Yeah, there's a little pointing device here. And you lean back and you will look at the stars at night. And theoretically, you want to describe it?
You're centered right around the...
Polaris.
Around Polaris. And Polaris is the star right now that's nearest to our axis of rotation. We're moving from Polaris through precession toward Vega. But right now we're pretty close to Polaris, and then there's a space like this, and so that you can actually see, and the outer, that's Ursula Minor, or the
Little Dipper.
Yeah, Little Dipper, and there's another space that's made so that you can feel the rotation of the Earth. One of the things that we always feel is we feel that the sun comes up and then goes down, when in fact the sun is more the stable body and that the Earth is turning. And so that our turning towards it has the sunrise in the east and set in the west. But we don't feel that. But sometimes you may have been in a train or in a plane, and the plane next to you, or even the gantry, the jetway, or the train next to you moves, and you feel that you're moving, even though you're seeing it. So it's an illusion that you're moving when in fact you're not. Well, here I have this, I've taken away reference. This is again talking about the horizonless space. I take away reference to horizontal, put you in this space, and when you stare at it, you see the stars. And so the stars become your reference point, but then they are moving, but that becomes your reference, so that you then feel that you're tipping. Just like when you are in a train and the train next to you moves and you feel that you're moving. So by this illusion that's created, you feel what is actually happening, and that is that the earth is turning. So sometimes it's interesting to feel that, because you feel like you're tipping all the time as you're watching this thing, and you do tend to just slide off the side.
I love that, the theater, which we started with, which delivers the truth.
Yes.
And ending, I just want to say, this is not your only project in Mexico. Well, actually, I'm just going to, in this interest of time, this is Houston's skyspace.
In the Quaker Meeting House.
Quaker Meeting House, just to see other skyspaces. I don't know why this is not working. That's the interior.
The interior of the meeting house.
This is in Japan, just to give you a sense. There's a House of Light. This is Hollywood, which is, of course, a movie theater of light, skyspace in a theater. And finally, you have built a pyramid in the Yucatan. And I just want to end with one question, which is, how has your time in Mexico, which I know you were in Mexico long ago, has it had an effect on your work? Can you describe in some way working in this amazing place, Mexico and the Yucatan, here in Culiacán, and has it influenced you? Do you feel something about this place that has gone into the work?
Well, I can tell you how it changed my life very early on. I was at Pomona College in Claremont, and I had a wonderful BSA 500 motorcycle, and I went down with two friends, and we traveled down to Mulegé, down in Baja. This is in 1961. The road was not paved, and we had to fix flats a number of times. I came all the way down to La Paz, and because it took a little bit longer than I had expected, I would mail my homework into the my mathematics professor, and I didn't know what math he was assigning in the class, so I just did all the problems in the book. And then I came back and took the test. I did very well on the test, and I, of course, had done all the problems in the book for homework. But he then recommended that maybe I not be a mathematics major, that I might have interests somewhere else that were stronger. So it was because of my time
in Mexico.
That
you are an artist. That's what I was looking for, that answer. Because of Mexico, you are an artist. So we've resolved that finally, once and
for all. Thank you very much.
So thank you, James. Thank all of you. And I really, this is such a beautiful work you made here in the garden in Culiacán. Thank you so much.
Thank you.